recording enabled the auto transcription, and I think the commission speakers are good to introduce themselves, and then later on, the other people who are being involved, like I think Kira will give just a very brief update on the Chancellor's renaming committee. But I think Dr. Parker and Dr. Laludis, I think you both can start.
Okay, you want us to start now? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, great, everyone. Welcome. And I was going to say thanks for joining us, but thanks for the opportunity to join you on a Friday afternoon. Professor Parker and I are very appreciative of your time. My name's Jim Laludis. I'm a member of the history faculty and also the Dean for Honors Carolina in the College of Arts and Sciences, and along with my colleague Pat Parker, co-chair of the UNC Commission on History, Race, and a Way Forward. Pat, I'll hand it off to you, and then we can put some images up on the screen.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jim. And again, yes, thank you to the RHA for having us. I think this is our second time being invited to join your group. So thank you very much. I'm Pat Parker. As Jim said, I'm the co-chair of the Commission on History, Race, and a Way Forward. I am also the chair of the Department of Communication and the incoming director of the Institute for the Arts and Humanities in the College of Arts and Sciences. So we're both delighted to join you. Do you want to go ahead and put the...
Yeah, great. And if the technology will cooperate, bear with us a minute. You're not seeing the right thing, are you?
Well, yeah, we are. If you put it on slideshow, I think.
Okay, great.
You're seeing your desktop and...
How's that?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we are seeing.
Oops, sorry. There we go.
All right. So we thought we'd give you, let's see, Jim, I think you were you can start.
Yeah.
Yeah, so right ahead.
Yeah, we're both coming from other meetings, so we're doing a little tag team here. But our charge from Chancellor Guskowitz, given to the commission about a year and 2 months ago, is at least straightforward in the words. It's to research and teach UNC's racial history, and to provide recommendations to the Chancellor and onto the Board of Trustees on ways that we as a community can best reckon with the past. And I think this part is really the crux of the issue, through an engagement with our history, a reckoning with our history, promote healing and repair on our campus and in the broader community.
Yes, and this is work that is being completed by multiple stakeholders. And so we're very delighted to have 16 colleagues who are joining us on the commission. And they come from all sectors. I mean, we have faculty, we have staff, we include center directors. We have, there are students who are on the commission, and of course, Graham Watkins is joining us today, and I believe is another student member of our commission joining us on the call today. Graham, or is it just you? Just wanted to acknowledge that the student commissioners who are on the call today. So Graham Watkins is one of those, and then we also have community leaders who are a part of the commission. And, you know, part of this, the makeup of the commission reflects in some ways the constituencies who have kept the issues at the forefront of who, you know, of the commission's charge. In some of the presentations that we give, we provide some of that history going forward. The fact that there was a history task force, there was the moratorium that had been imposed by the Board of Trustees in terms of names on buildings and so forth. So we won't rehearse that here, but we do want to acknowledge that as a commission, we're very grateful for the work that preceded our current work here. And I'm seeing in the chat that we do have another student commissioner. We have Sydney Walker, who is on the call as well. So we're grateful to have student as part of our commission, as well as faculty, staff, and community leaders.
So we are sort of organized internally into 3 working subgroups within the commission, with obviously overlapping sort of focal points. We have one subcommittee is focused on archives, history, research, curation. A lot of words there to say that we have an active program in the archives in Wilson Library researching the university's history, and in particular working to uncover stories that have been hidden, that have been silenced, have been there in the archives, but have really not been brought to the surface in the way that the university talks and thinks about its past. And here in particular, the work is focused on the history of slavery in the university, and within that broad topic, a really important focus on the names that are not on the landscape, the names of the enslaved men and women who built and sustained this institution through the better part of its first 3/4 of a century of history.
We are also, part of the scope of our work is to look at curriculum development and teaching. And we're actually in a process of thinking about each of these areas. And one of the things we've been thinking about is that this part of our work is really about disseminating what we're learning along the way. And in many ways, this forum, this town hall, is falls within the scope of that work in terms of teaching about the history of the university and race and slavery, but also what we're learning, and a little bit more about that later in terms of how this today's session is about disseminating what we're learning. And then a third area of our work is engagement, ethics, and reckoning. And that part of our work is about how we are engaging with the multiple stakeholders who are a part of this work, who to have their voices as a part of what we're the questions we ask about, on this charge of how the university is reckoning with history and race, and what principles are we bringing to this work, and how that's guiding us. Jim, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, the other thing I'd add, I'm just reminded we were doing this one time before, Pat, and you made the point here, and I think it's a really important one, that we also approach this work understanding that it's the undertaking of many hands. As Professor Parker said earlier, other groups have worked on these issues before us, and across the campus there are many students and faculty and staff engaged in elements of this work. So part of our charge is also to be a kind of place to collect that work and lift it up so that it's more visible across the campus. And I should just say here, particularly when we think about curriculum development and teaching, we'd love to hear from you, from students, your ideas about ways we might effectively do that. Our goal, this commission won't last forever, but our goal is that its work will be kind of permanently embedded in the way that the university teaches and talks about its past in the classroom and in other venues. And also, of course, that it will make a real and measurable difference in terms of equity and inclusion on this campus long after the commission has finished its 3-year term. So as I think 4 names came off of buildings last summer, the commission prepared dossiers on Charles Brantley Aycock, Thomas Ruffin, Julian Carr, and Josephus Daniels. And on the basis of that research and recommendation from the commission, the trustees removed those names. The process is ongoing now, hopefully in time for the trustees' May meeting, to identify some names to replace them on the landscape. But our work here isn't finished. I mean, we have a list of 35 or 40 names on the landscape that are in one way or the other problematic, related to the history of slavery, related to the history of Jim Crow. And so our work on doing the research, the stories behind those names, is ongoing. And we will actually next week send Chancellor Guskowitz an additional 9 dossiers together with a recommendation that those names be removed from the landscape. And once that's official, those materials will be available on our website. So we thought today it would be helpful, we thought, to share with you some of the premises, the kind of guiding assumptions and principles that are shaping this work. And so we'd like to take the rest of our time to do that quickly, just to kind of give us all some intellectual tools for wrestling with this question of names on the landscape, questions of their meaning and the questions associated with the decision regarding removal.
So I'm going to begin with one of those conceptual tools. This is a model that I use in my work. I should have mentioned at the beginning that my area of research is on communication and leadership and social justice. And what grounds that work, what pulls those elements together, is community engagement. And so when I'm working in communities, I often am using some version of this model. And this is called the Storytelling for Social Justice model. And it came out of a storytelling project that was at Barnard College. Some colleagues at Leanne Bell at Columbia College, Kayhan Irani, who is wonderful. If you want to look her up, she's fabulous. She's an independent scholar who does great work in terms of storytelling. And the reason this model fits within, this work of the commission is that, changing names on buildings, removing names from buildings is a part of a larger story. I mean, it's, one way that you can think about our work is that we're asking the question, how do we create a more complete and accurate narrative that will help people understand how racial hierarchy has been embedded in our society? This is part of the work of the commission, is to think about this, having a more complete and accurate narrative of how racial hierarchy has been embedded in our story, in our society. Even just raising that question is starting to be a transformative process. And so this model represents a transformative process going from the stock stories that we tell ourselves that maintain the status quo, that often reinforce racial hierarchy. So going from those kinds of stories to counter storytelling that allows a community to tell new stories. So a major theme, this is the last thing I'll say before I tell you about the model, a major theme of the commission's work is this idea of changing the narrative. What are the stories that are told? Who tells them? Where are they told? So these are questions that drive our work. And so this model gives you one way of thinking, of situating this idea of why are we removing names from buildings? So just briefly, I'll tell you about the 4 components here that lead to building a counter storytelling community. So you'll see at the top of the model, it's sort of circular, but leading to change ultimately. The first is the stock stories. And these are the stories that are told by a dominant group. I mean, it can be a small group or it can be a larger society. Told by the dominant group, passed on through historical and literary documents, and celebrated through public rituals, monuments, buildings, media representations, and so on. So those are the stock stories that oftentimes we don't critically engage with them. The other side of the coin, so to speak, of a stock story would be the concealed stories. And these are the stories that coexist alongside the stock stories, but most often they remain in the shadows, hidden from public view. The recent attention to policing in communities, I should say, in sort of that's been an attention for centuries in many areas because that's the place where they're concealed, has brought to the attention of a larger part of society of the concealed stories about policing in communities of color. For example, that's just one example. Jim mentioned in the archives where the hidden stories of this university, the founding of this university, are often concealed. So we have stock stories and concealed stories, and that creates the attention that produce resistance stories. And the resistance stories are both historical and contemporary. They tell about how people have resisted, for example, racism and other systems of oppression, and challenged those stock stories that support it, and then how they fought for more equal and inclusive social arrangements. And so it's really important to study those resistance stories. That's part of my work. I've been studying sort of the history of anti-racist organizing in Black women's bridge leadership, which is a historical tradition in African-American women's history. So what do we learn from studying, looking at those resistance stories? They can tell us what the stock stories are. They can tell us what the concealed stories have been. And then this produces this energy, sort of a synergy, really, for creating counter stories. And these are the new stories that are deliberately constructed to challenge the stock stories, to build on and amplify resistance stories, and offer ways to interrupt the status quo and work for change. And I'd like to think about the commission as building this counter storytelling community.
Sorry about that. I didn't think I did that.
You did. You did.
I just tried to put my cursor back in the right place.
That's it. Well, I was just finishing up that's how we create these emerging stories. And so just giving that framework of why it's important to examine these, what is the function, or what role are the current building names, some of the building names, how are they the stock stories? What are they concealing? What do we learn from the resistance, and how do we tell new stories? And Jim, I'll throw it over to you as the other part of our work in that.
Great. Well, just to develop that a little bit, 4 premises to share here that are guiding our work. These are the kinds of questions you often hear arise when people are talking about the issue of removing names. And I think Pat and I both don't like PowerPoint slides with lots of words, but we felt today it was actually really important that you be able to see all of the words as we were laying this out. So, first of all, the notion that, well, the people we're talking about, their behavior may be repugnant to us today, but they were just men of their times. Well, I think it's really important to question that. In the case of, the buildings we're addressing on this campus, we're talking about men who occupied positions of great power and influence. They led other men to war. They condoned the use of violence to affect the outcome of elections. They held high offices of public trust. They enacted laws. They defined the terms of debate over race and democracy. And in the case of the university, they insinuated all of that into the education of the young, of people like you. And they did these things in the name of what they themselves called white supremacy. Sometimes people think we're attaching those words, but those are words that these actors spoke. And so it seems reasonable to assume on that basis that these men bear a special moral responsibility for the injustices of the past, and injustices of the past that in many respects remain manifest in our society today. Uh, this notion is related. Again, the idea that a body of ideas, actions that, well, they were conventional at the time, they were legal at the time. Again, as repugnant as the behavior might be to us today, it was widespread and accepted in the past. The enslavement of black children, women, and men is perhaps the best example. It was legal. It was widely practiced before 1865. But this is kind of to Pat's point about the resistance stories. It's also important to recognize that slavery was commonly denounced, and most immediately by the 4 million people held in bondage, who, through countless forms of resistance, demanded freedom and that their humanity be recognized. And so we should also remember that enslavers had opportunities at every turn to reform their thinking and their behavior, and their refusal to do that was a moral choice for which there is no easy absolution. And you can argue much the same for the regime of Jim Crow. Many of the men who are profiled in the dossiers we're preparing, they made active choices to enrich and empower themselves along with others of their ilk by terrorizing, exploiting, disenfranchising, and impoverishing their fellow citizens on the basis of color. Their behavior can't be explained away by simply asserting that in the past everyone thought that way. Those kinds of claims are historically untrue. They're demonstrably dangerous. And worst of all, they dismiss the dissenters, the people of conscience and principle, who dare to think and act differently. The buildings we're addressing in these dossiers, they're not benign memorials. All right, it's important to understand that earlier stewards of the university chose names for those buildings that made the buildings part of an express effort to deny that racial slavery and white supremacy were moral evils, and that both the Confederacy and the Jim Crow South were. In the words of New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu, and I think you know about his role in taking down the statue of Lee in New Orleans, really beautiful phrase here, on the wrong side, not only of history, but of humanity. And then finally, the notion that removing names from buildings on this campus will somehow erase the university's history. Well, the story of Carolina's past is going to continue to be preserved in the archives. It'll be preserved in the research that students like you and faculty do, in the great variety of ways that stakeholders in this university speak to our core values and recount the events in which those values were forged. And it seems also really important here to bear in mind, and this may sound like a strange thing for a historian to say. I love writing about the past. I don't love the tyranny of the past. And the point here is that every new generation, you, right, have a right and responsibility to make your own moral judgments, informed by history, but not somehow beholden to the past simply for the past's sake. that kind of critical self-examination is how we grow and prepare ourselves as individuals, as an institution, to meet the challenges of our own historical moment. Think about history this way. It's not simply a settled record of what was, of what happened in the past, but history is also a tool for discerning what is and what should be. History, the study of the past, has this extraordinary power to expand our imagination about the present and about the future. And it's back to those stories of resistance. Recovering those kinds of stories help us understand that nothing about the past was inevitable. Right? The present we live in was not the inevitable product of the past. It was contingent. People made choices. Well, that's liberating, right? Because it means we can make choices as well, informed by understanding of the roads taken and the roads left behind in the past. It really has this enormous power to expand our imagination about the kind of world we want to live in today and in the future. So those are some of the ideas and principles that are guiding our work.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Laludis and Dr. Parker. Before we go into the second part of the town hall, which is going to be led by some discussion questions, I think Kira has some updates to give on behalf of the Chancellor's Honorific Renaming Committee.
Hi everyone, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Great, awesome. I hope everyone is doing well. I think I know everyone on the call, so I won't spend too much time introducing myself again, but you know me as the RHA president, and I've had a great opportunity to work on this at many different levels. For the sake of time, I'll keep this very brief. I just want to remind everybody that we have until 5 o'clock this afternoon, so within the next half hour, to submit names for the first 3 buildings that were discussed. So if you would like to do that, I've shared the links in the chat, as well as the link to a list of names that have already been submitted. And so just wanted to share that, and also just thank the commission and RHA leaders who have been working tirelessly on trying to educate everyone on this process. So thank you all so much, and I'm opening up to discussion now.
Thank you so much, Kira. So the first question I kind of want to ask mainly the students in this chat or in this call is, what does it mean to you as a student that buildings named after problematic individuals have had their names removed? And so feel free to either raise your hand or type in the chat what that makes you feel. And I just want to say that, in my opinion, for me as a student at Carolina, I think that there are a lot of things to be proud of at Carolina. But to me, I think this means so much because the university has historically been, kind of slow when it comes to making progress. But the fact that, the chancellor kind of sent out this message asking students themselves to suggest names for the buildings that have had these names removed is a big step forward. There's always more work to be done, but I think it's very impactful for me as a student.
Yeah, and to add to Anusha's question, I just want to hear how you feel about the process. Dr. Parker and Dr. Laludis shared the nuances, but just how you feel about the process and what your experience of that has been living on campus and hearing, oh, the names got removed. What has that meant to you? What has been your experience with that?
I think I'll join in here just as well to to add on to what Anusha already shared, I think, as a Black woman in this space, being able to talk about the experience of living in a residence hall named after Charles B. Aycock, who was the 50th governor of North Carolina and was also somebody who actively supported white supremacy campaigns. It's really difficult on many, many levels to know and understand that that was a namesake that was placed on a building, the first building that I lived on on campus. And it's, I think, disappointing and sad that we still have those names on there. But I am excited by how quickly I think the turnaround has been since the summer, given how things tend to operate within the university, which is a little bit slower. But I'm excited that students are being looped into the process, and hopefully there'll be more continued collaboration between the removal part of the process and the actual renaming part as well through the commission. So I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kira. And I just wanted to read out a few responses from the chat. And so Ellie said, I appreciate that students are being involved in the process, but I'm also disappointed at how lengthy the process seems to have been, which is kind of along the lines of a couple of other comments about how it's been slow moving, having progress at UNC. And Max said he agrees with that. I think that the lack of transparency by administration on the process has been frustrating, but I'm so proud of the work that has been done by UNC students and staff on this issue. And so it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but I think people are overall excited that UNC is at least taking a step forward.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Sydney.
To kind of echo, it seems like everyone is pretty satisfied, at least with student involvement, though maybe not the time that it is taking for the process. So just another question that we have for students is, other than submitting names in accordance to the chancellor's announcement on March 26th, are there any other ways you can think of to get students like yourselves involved in the process?
I think Kira kind of already gave us our first answer on that, which was, first of all, submitting names by 5 p.m. today. So if you haven't done that already, I encourage you to submit a name for one of the unnamed residence halls. But another way, in my opinion, that I think students can get involved in, I want to make sure that other people have the space to talk to, but in my opinion, I think that other than just having students involved at the very beginning of the process, which is just submitting names, I think students should also have input out of the names that are eventually chosen, which one they think is the most meaningful to replace the buildings. But I'm curious about what other people's thoughts are.
Yeah, I think it's definitely hard, as we can see with like all of the efforts this year, to get people like to actually like come to events like this and like really dedicate themselves to it. But a thing that we've been able to leverage this year is social media. And I worked like a little bit with Sydney on things that we've been putting out with the Social Justice Advocacy Board. And unfortunately, I won't be part of RHA leadership next year, but a huge way is I would love to see, I know there's like some leaders in RHA that are going to be there next year, and I would love to see like a continuing effort on these social media on these social media efforts, because like that's like one way to keep students like just kind of like in the know and like knowing about this process, so that it's not, there isn't kind of like a lack of knowledge.
Absolutely. And kind of like another question to kind of piggyback off of that, is just like, how will building, like changing and the removal of these building names enhance your experience at Carolina? Or how do you see it just changing your Carolina experience? Yeah.
I think Albert has his hand raised.
I guess just part of it is like, so I guess for reference, I'm from Kentucky. So like I don't really have like a long sort of standing connection with UNC. But one of the things is like I'm also a family of immigrants, so when I bring my family to UNC and I show them this is our campus, and they look at all the names on all the different halls and they ask, oh, why is it named this? If I tell them, oh, it was someone who did some really bad things in history, or had some very questionable morals, part of that, it's a little awkward, and it may be a little concerning because they say, well, this is where you go to class, and then they think like, why does the university sort of still celebrate this kind of thing? Um, so I think just being able to change the name to someone that had, um, I guess, more of like a positive, um, contribution to our history, is very much just, I guess, enhancing part of just the image of the university, but also um, just some of the concerns of my family.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Albert. One one thing I think that goes along with that is us and as students knowing the history, right? And I think and a challenge to a lot of us is to have the care and desire to learn the history, right? And to part of the work of the commission is to make that history available, but I'd also love to hear ideas from you all of ways that we might make this information about these individuals, more available to students, or more, readily accessible on campus. But also Jeremiah, I think, has his hand up, so I want to let him speak too.
Yeah, I would just think, for my personal experience, like there's some sort of like acknowledgement for, some of the histories that these people, have had. And so I think removing those names, that in and of itself starts a conversation, because it's like, oh, why is this name being removed? Oh, because this person, was affiliated with, this group thing. And so I think, um, that in and of itself is very powerful. But even beyond, I guess, my own personal experience, I think people like students down the line who are coming to Carolina, I think they won't have to. It sounds like there's a lot of names and a lot of work to do, but I guess as time goes on, being in buildings named after white supremacists, like that will start to, hopefully, that will start to go down, and people won't have to feel awkward, like living in these buildings and learning in these buildings. So yeah, I think it goes, in my opinion, from like my experience, but then also the experience of many students down the line.
Graham, I just want to say, I mean, that's a really great question. And again, we want to kind of open the door to offer you an invitation. We can produce all sorts of stuff, getting it out widely shared and so on, it is different. And you're the audience, so to the degree that, you can help us think creatively about ways to share this material with students, that would just be absolutely invaluable.
And I wanted to add my thanks for the question, and also for the responses, and just to say that I think what you all have shared about why these the names are problematic, are important. They reinforce sort of what we were talking about, that this is how we build the case. I'm particularly thinking about, Albert, what you shared in terms of the story that you're telling your parents and them saying, so it raises the question for us as a university: what is the story we want to tell about our university? And that is such a compelling place for us to be in terms of making this case. And so thank you. We'll be bringing that forward as we take forward these 9 names with the building that case.
Yeah, I just kind of want to echo Albert's sentiment, because even though I have lived in North Carolina for the past few years, I know that there's a lot of pride in this university, but I've always wondered how we can talk about how we are the best university in the country when we have had these names on our campus for so long. And I think there was only momentum that started gaining recently, about, how attention was being brought to, for example, um, the Wilmington riots, and how that was, I think, the only successful coup on American soil in history. And the fact that it's taken that long to acknowledge it, I think, is really significant. But I think it shows that it's even more meaningful that now that we're finally taking these steps. And as to the question of how we can make the name removal process more visible to students, I think the fact that the commission has student representatives on the board is a significant first step. They have been so helpful in kind of getting the word out and collaborating with organizations like us on throwing events like this. And so I think this is a crucial step of getting students involved in telling other students.
And Nusha, hopefully there'll be more opportunities for this, assuming we return to something approximating normal in the fall. We started our work a year ago, February. We had great plans for engaging the campus and the community, and then the virus happened. But fingers crossed we'll be able to be in one another's company a lot more come fall.
Yes, fingers crossed. And I actually have a couple of questions for the commission, but of course, if people think of questions while we're talking, feel free to put them in the chat, or feel free to DM me or Sydney, and we can share it with the entire group. But I was just wondering, for the co-chairs of the commission, what are your personal, or just in general, what are the goals of the name removal process? And why should students continue to care about this important process?
Wow, there's a simple question. Yeah, I mean, I can start with a few things, Pat. I think some of the things that points have been made about the institution's history, the ugliness of a good bit of that history. I think it's also the case that this institution at its very best historically has been those moments when people here have had the courage to stand up and to challenge the way things are, and point a path to a better future. So I like to think that we're following in that tradition. I suppose what's most important to me is something we said early on in the conversation, is that at the end of the 3 years we've not just created some documents and a report, and but that something is measurably different about this campus. We talk all the time about it being the people's university. Well, let's figure out how to live that in a way that makes everyone valued at this institution, and educates people like you who will go out and live that in your own careers. This institution's about something more than just the geography inside the stone walls. It's a powerful role to play. You have a powerful role to play in what the future of this state and this country, and for that matter, the world's gonna look like. So that's all getting pretty grandiose, but I'm hoping that in some measurable way this commission contributes to that.
Well said, Jim. And I think for me personally, I do, my history is all tied up with, not with Carolina per se, but with the South. I was born in the South. I was born in Arkansas, and only 2 generations from, ancestors who were enslaved. in this country. And so what is embedded in the name removal process for me is a kind of reckoning and a truth telling that I think is so important. So the names on the building, I mean, it goes back to the storytelling model. That's a symbolic representation of a larger story that has been told, and that the concealed stories, in many ways, some of those concealed stories live in my very being, you know? And so having a process in which the truth of those stories comes out, and there's a reckoning and a repair of that happens. That's something that's important to me personally. So you asked the question in a particular way, Anusha, and so if you'll indulge me in sharing that personal history. But why should it be important for students? I mean, I think Jim has said it very well, that the teaching of this history is so important. And for me, as a part of the humanities, it's how we understand our humanity, right? Like we can stake a claim about who we want to be as humans, engaging other humans. And that's just incredibly exciting to me. And I love that students would be leading that conversation. So that's what I think this work is about.
Yeah, and I would just share my vision and goal. I have had the opportunity to be a student on the commission, and get to, it has also experienced the frustration of like being a student, wanting to see change in the 4 years that I'm here, but realizing that there are processes that have to be done, and these are long situated problems that the university is reckoning with, and wants to do a right job, to do a proper job with, and respect the communities that it impacts. And names that will then also exist for a long time after us. And my vision is ultimately that the university would be able to claim our history and not be ashamed of it, but own up to it. I would love to see us be willing to talk about this on our tours, right? Like, and the student ambassadors, incorporating it into the university story, right? And Dr. Parker talked about storytelling. It's a part of who we are, and I think we have to own that and it be a part of our history. And that's something that makes us great. That can be something that makes us the first university. Like, yes, we're the first state university, but there's going to be problems that come with that, but there's also beauty that comes with that, and being willing to take it all, I think, is important. So
Yeah, and I agree with Graham. I think that UNC should definitely acknowledge this at least. But what I'm excited for is that we can at least continue this partnership. And by we, I mean RHA and the commission. We were discussing in one of our meetings with like Max, Ellie, Kira, and the student leaders on this call, how we can continue to kind of incorporate this into programming. And one of the ideas, if maybe Max or Ellie wants to talk more about it, is that we can continue to incorporate this into community government programming. And so maybe we can ask if RAs could be educated on the history of the buildings that they RA for, and if they can maybe make programs out of that to inform people, even though this building used to be named after white supremacists, if the building is renamed, we can talk about the person it was renamed after. And so I think that's one of the ways in which students can continue to show that they not only care about the removal and renaming process, but also that they want to continue forward with making progress.
Just to like comment really quickly, as both a student and a commission member, I think another reason why it's important for students to care is I think it really matters when you're able to graduate from a university and be proud of them for not only like always have done the right thing, but like they may have started on the wrong foot, but they actually righted their wrong. And I think that that's something that graduating UNC, I'll be able to actually be proud of. And the fact that we're able to be a part of that change, I think means even more.
Yeah, those are some great comments. And I was also wondering if the co-chairs had any maybe thoughts about how the students should kind of get involved overall. Maybe any specific ideas or just any announcements you want to make to students.
We definitely welcome your the continuation of this partnership, as you said, Anusha. That's already a great way to get involved. And you know, we're right now going through a process where we're setting some priorities and thinking more about what we'll do in the next 2 years. And I think I would just invite you to continue to follow, you know, what the commission is doing and be sort of at the ready when we start to reach out to think about following up on some of these great ideas. I love the idea that Graham just mentioned about ambassadors helping to tell the story. And so those are some of the ways I think. Jim, did you want to add anything?
Well, I would just say continue to let it be known that this matters to you. You know, there are lots of good people who have been a part of getting us to this point. Um, and I think at the front of the line, it's been students. Um, so, you know, stay engaged. And as I say, you know, continue to let it be known that this matters to you.
Thank you. And I was just wondering if any of the students on this call had any, you know, maybe thoughts or personal experiences to kind of wrap this up. I remember Kira said earlier, I think her Wi-Fi cut out, but I think it's really impactful, like hearing Kira's story about how she, as a Black woman, had to live in a residence hall named after ACOC. And so I think the fact that students have these personal experiences really speaks to the importance of this matter. I lived in South Campus. I lived in Manning East and then Manning West. And I just think that I wasn't really sure who my buildings were named after. And I think that it's really important that we continue to advertise and publicize this and educate students as they come into Carolina about this. And so I was wondering if any other students on this call have any like personal thoughts or feelings about this. Yes, Kenna, you raised your hand.
Oh, yes. It's not so much like a personal story. I mean, I also did live in ACOC, and I didn't know of the history associated with that name either. But I think one of the things that I've noticed also with history is that, or I guess why we don't own up to history, is the fact that we have romanticized the history that we have today and also have so much pride in the existence of how our system is already that it's very hard for us to think of ways to even address the current or like the past history that's really tarnishing of the image that we have. So I guess this is more of a question, I guess, or I guess it could be like a discussion too, but we don't really have too much time. How can we, like, I guess, especially for those that are at the top, like how can we make them understand that this history or this people knowing of this history isn't really going to tarnish it as much as it is actually just owning up to it, and that this did happen and it's just a matter of us being aware and just move forward with this history.
Well, you know, Kenna, that's such an important question, and it's actually central to the process that the commission is adopting to do this work, and that is to engage with multiple constituencies, let us say, right? And you said, you know, the you know, people at the top who may not who may be perpetuating the status quo because they are not educated about this, the history, sort of the counter story of that history, right? So this romanticized history has been around for a long time. And, some of the most compelling conversations we've had have been with some of the descendants of the names on buildings. And some of this is in the public, the press. And so I think that's a part of just having that conversation where people get educated about the counter stories. And Jim, you probably have a lot more to say about that, I think, as a
Oh,
historian.
no, well, I mean, there is that kind of romanticized understanding of the past that is so widely shared and unquestioned. I teach a course on North Carolina since 1865 every spring. In some ways, it's 15 weeks of, addressing just the issue we're talking about here. So, that work of education is really important. I remember that in the controversy over the Confederate monument. There were lots of people who said, their immediate response was because they didn't know the history. Well, it's a veterans memorial, and that wasn't a ridiculous assumption if you didn't know the history. If you put most of us anywhere in the world in front of a monument of a soldier, that might be our first guess. Most of those people, once they knew the history, the response was, okay, I understand now. Yeah, it needs not to be here. So I think we do need to be mindful just the importance of doing that ongoing work of education. And, Ken, as you said, I said, unpacking that romanticized notion of the past. And again, I mean, I'll come back to something I said earlier. I mean, I think this is part of this, in the university story. What I'm proud about, I was an undergraduate here. What I'm proud about at this place is the people in the history of the institution, as I said, had the courage to stand up and speak truth. That's really the legacy we ought to pick up and celebrate. It's that's how you lead. If you want to be the institution that other people look to, that's how you do that. With courage and honesty. Anisha, I loved your question in part because it made me think whether anybody's ever collected any of these student stories. This story you told and that Albert told, it would be really interesting, I think, to kind of have a collection of those reflections, on how students have lived these issues. These aren't just theoretical abstractions.
I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking that might be a good project going forward.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. I hadn't thought of that. But as we have been working to collaborate on this town hall and other programs, I didn't realize that we didn't compile all of our personal student stories in one place. And so I think that's definitely a direction that we could take going forward. And I think Sydney, and I think all of the other, probably the people who've worked on this have agreed. And that's a great idea. I'm glad that you mentioned that.
It was yours. Historians in the future will be deeply grateful to you if you'll do this. And maybe the commission could help you, do some of that. It'd be a great oral history project for a group of people.
Interesting, yeah. An oral history project, that would be really cool, actually. We can definitely talk about that in the future, but I know it's 5:01 and I want to respect everyone's time. And so I wanted to thank the co-chairs, Dr. Laludis and Dr. Parker, for speaking. And of course, all of the students who helped make this possible. And I just wanted to thank you all for your time, and thank you so much for such a fruitful discussion.
It's great to be here. Can I do an ad before we go off?
Of course,
and
yeah.
that is, I'm going to teach an archival course in the fall on slavery in the university. So if you want to spend some time with dusty, illegible documents in the fall, shoot me an email, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting course, actually. Oh, Dr. Parker, do you have anything to say?
No, I was just going to say thank you and thanks for having us again, and look forward to our future collaboration.
Of course. And I think that's pretty much it. Thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the beautiful day it is outside.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Great weekend.